You see, theoretically, you can have a Chick-fil-A franchise for just $10,000, but there is a major catch. But before we dig into that catch,
There's always a catch somewhere. It's never, even if it's $1 million, there's a catch somewhere. It's not always black and white.
you know that the average restaurant franchise can oftentimes cost well over $1 million. In fact, opening up a Cane's chicken restaurant costs about $1 million.
If y'all never had Cane's, it's kind of overhyped. I'm just gonna leave it right there. It's kind of overhyped, but it's some good sauce. But I'm gonna just leave it right there.
Total investment. Opening up a KFC costs about 1.5, a Popeyes chicken costs about $500,000, and a McDonald's franchise can cost anywhere between $1 and $2.2 million. And while these national brands that all of us have heard of can cost millions of dollars to open up, Chick-fil-A, on the other hand, only costs $10,000. Yes, $10,000. But that begs the question of, what is the catch? What's the catch of owning a Chick-fil-A franchise if it's only going to cost you $10,000 in order to do so? And so in this video, I'm going to be answering that exact same question. I'm going to be breaking down what the catch is of owning a Chick-fil-A franchise restaurant. I'm going to talk about how it's possible to do so for just $10,000. I'm going to be explaining and breaking down the entire Chick-fil-A franchise structure. So let's get started. Now, over the years, I've seen so many TikToks, blog articles, news articles, and YouTube videos talking about the Chick-fil-A franchise system. And oftentimes these articles are riddled with clickbait, talking about how you can own a Chick-fil-A for $10,000. But the reality is these videos, TikToks, and articles are oftentimes filled with misinformation that simply isn't accurate in regards to the Chick-fil-A franchise specifically. You see, theoretically, you can have a Chick-fil-A franchise for just $10,000, but there is a major catch. But before we dig into that catch,
There's always a catch somewhere. It's never, even if it's $1 million, there's a catch somewhere. It's not always black and white.
let's first talk about some of the statistics associated with Chick-fil-A specifically. Did you know that Chick-fil-A is on par as far as competitiveness goes to some of the most prestigious institutions in the world? For example, Harvard University has an acceptance rate of 4.6%, meaning that of all of the students that apply to go to Harvard, only 4.6% actually get into Harvard. The NASA space program, on the other hand, has an acceptance rate of less than 1%, meaning that of everybody that applies to become an astronaut at NASA, less than 1% actually are able to do so, which is crazy to think about, because if you're on the verge of applying to become an astronaut at NASA, you are probably already super smart and super qualified. So the fact that 1% actually gets in is almost mind-blowing to think about. Well, Chick-fil-A, on the other hand, has an acceptance rate of about 1%, meaning that if you want to become a Chick-fil-A operator and you want to do so, and you go through the application process, you have a 1% chance of actually being accepted into the program. Not only its low acceptance rate, Chick-fil-A application process is considered to be extremely strenuous. They are known for the fact that they vet their operators through an extremely strenuous process. They look at credit scores, they look at business history, they look at religious history. They oftentimes require recommendations from religious figures like pastors, for example. There is an extremely strict process that you must go through if you want to become a Chick-fil-A operator. But then once you get through this strenuous process, you give everything that Chick-fil-A requires and you become that lucky 1%. All you have to do is write a $10,000 check and now you own a Chick-fil-A franchise, right? Well, that is wrong. You see, throughout this video so far, I have been very intentional with my words that I've been using to describe the Chick-fil-A franchise system. You may have noticed that I've been using the word operate rather than franchisee, or I've been using the word operate, not own. That is something that I've been doing extremely intentionally, because whenever you have a Chick-fil-A franchise, you actually don't own that Chick-fil-A franchise. You are not a Chick-fil-A franchisee. Instead, you operate the franchise and you are an operator of a Chick-fil-A restaurant. This verbiage is incredibly important because whenever you are a franchisee and you own a franchise business, there is ownership associated with that. You have tangible ownership of that business, and there is a high price tag associated with that. Let's use Popeye's chicken, for example. If you own a Popeye's chicken restaurant, yes, you have to pay $500,000 in order to do so. But after you pay that money and after your restaurant is up and running, you own that restaurant. What you do from then on out is, to an extent, your choice, as long as you adhere to the Popeye's franchise system. You could sell that franchise for a profit later on. You could go and open more locations. You could expand into other brands. There is a ton that you're able to do once you become an owner and operator of a franchise. Chick-fil-A, on the other hand, is very, very different. Whenever you are a Chick-fil-A operator, you are tied to Chick-fil-A specifically. You are not able to go out and explore other brands, meaning if you operate a Chick-fil-A restaurant, you can't go and explore the idea of opening a McDonald's or a Papa.
I've heard of this before, as far as like having it where you can only be an operator, franchisee, so to speak, for Chick-fil-A. But I've also heard like other business people, they would put the business in, what is the word? It's like basically you putting it into a different LLC than your name, so that way you can still go out and do other businesses with other franchises. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Leave your comments down below, but that's what I've heard. Like that's a bypass, or that's a loophole to still be a operator in Chick-fil-A and also owning different franchises. And give me the right verbiage too.
John's or Smoothie King. You have to stay with Chick-fil-A. In addition to having to stay with Chick-fil-A, you also are limited to the expansion. You see, Chick-fil-A doesn't want their operators to operate 20, 30, 40 restaurants, which is something that is fairly common in the world of other franchise brands. For example, there are dozens of franchisees that own 30, 40 McDonald's or 50 or 60 Taco Bells. This is simply not the case with Chick-fil-A. Not only that, but with Chick-fil-A, you actually don't own the location. You are simply the operator of the location, meaning that if you ever decided to retire or you decided that you wanted to exit the Chick-fil-A brand and you wanted to sell that brand, you actually have no authority to do so. You cannot simply sell your franchise location. Instead, whenever it's time for you to exit the brand for whatever reason, you have to contact Chick-fil-A, and then Chick-fil-A will simply find another operator. It's more on par with quitting a job than selling a business, because you actually don't get to make any profit off of the switch of hands with a Chick-fil-A franchise. So while selling a traditional franchise like a
So what is the, she's probably gonna go into this, but what is the benefits of that then? Like, I'm intrigued on why it's set up that way. I know like Chick-fil-A always been different, but I didn't know it was like this detail. Like, wow, that's crazy.
Again, a Popeyes or a KFC or a McDonald's, for example, you could potentially stand to make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. With a Chick-fil-A franchise, you don't get to make anything. You simply just no longer operate it.
So with Geico, we can easily bundle home and car insurance and save even more?
Yeah, home, car, motorcycle, all bundled.
It. Now, depending on the lens that you view this through, this could be a good or a bad thing. If you are very entrepreneurial minded and you want to own dozens, if not hundreds of franchise businesses in the future, then operating a Chick-fil-A probably wouldn't be the right route for you, because no matter how successful you are at operating a Chick-fil-A restaurant, you would never have the opportunity to own hundreds because the system simply wouldn't allow it. But on the other hand, if you're somebody that isn't as entrepreneurial minded and you're not necessarily interested in owning a ton of different businesses, instead you want a high paying and secure job, then operating a Chick-fil-A restaurant could be a really great path for you. But that simply isn't all. In order to fully understand this $10,000 price tag and entry point for a Chick-fil-A franchise, you need to understand some other figures as well. You see, whenever it comes to owning a franchise, there are a few different costs associated with a franchise, regardless of what franchise you open. You have your franchise fee, which is the fee that you pay to get your foot into the door into that franchise system. This is oftentimes due before you even open your location. It's the very first thing that you will pay to the franchisor, which is the parent company. In this case, it's Chick-fil-A. The average franchise fee across franchises in general is about $35,000 to $45,000.
There go to catch. It's not just the 10K. You see, there's gonna be some fees on top of it. Let's break it down.
In the case of Chick-fil-A, this is just $10,000. Next up is the total investment.
Oh, okay.
This is the investment that is required in order to get your business up and running. This could include construction costs, equipment costs, food costs, getting your employees hired, uniforms, marketing, and more. And this varies greatly depending on what type of franchise you're opening. For some franchises, this can be extremely low, like $50,000, $60,000. For other franchises, like McDonald's, for example, this could be $2.2 million. This is something that varies significantly depending on the franchise business you're opening. But in the case of Chick-fil-A, this is $0. You see, in the case of Chick-fil-A, you have to pay that $10,000 franchise fee, which is already significantly below average as far as franchise fees go. And then whenever it comes to the build out and the total investment, you don't have to invest anything. Chick-fil-A foots the bill for it all. They pay for construction, they pay for equipment, they pay for the initial food costs, they help you hire, they really do everything. But again, there is a big caveat to this that I'll explain in a little bit. Next up is royalty fees. Now, royalty fees is basically your monthly payment that you have to pay the franchisor in order to continue operating as a franchisee. This is a very standard practice amongst franchise businesses, and an average royalty fee industry-wide is between 6 and 8%, meaning that if you are a franchisee, you are going to be required to pay 6 to 8% of gross sales to your franchisor each and every week or each and every month, depending on how the franchise system is structured. With Chick-fil-A, though, this is substantially higher than the industry average at 15%, meaning that with Chick-fil-A, you have to pay 15% of gross sales each and every week or month back to Chick-fil-A. So let's say, for example, that a Chick-fil-A franchise was to make $100,000 in any single week. Well, before any expenses are paid, before you pay anything, before you pay yourself, you need to pay $15,000 back to Chick-fil-A. That is something that is a requirement, and you have to do it as a Chick-fil-A operator. Now, royalty, franchise fee, and initial investment are some of the 3 standard prices, standard fees that come along with owning a franchise business. But there are some other costs associated with owning a Chick-fil-A business specifically that aren't necessarily the industry norm. First and foremost is rent. Now, I've mentioned a lot throughout this video that whenever you're a Chick-fil-A operator, you don't own the business, and thus you don't own the building. So the question is, well, who owns the building? And the answer to that is Chick-fil-A in most cases. You see, in the case of a Chick-fil-A franchise, you don't own the business, Chick-fil-A does. And as a result, whether they're building out a new space that Chick-fil-A owns or whether they're leasing a space that a third-party landlord owns, Chick-fil-A is the person that has control of the building. And as a result, as a Chick-fil-A operator, you have to pay rent to the Chick-fil-A system, and that rent is determined by Chick-fil-A. But that's not all. There is also a substantial fee that must be paid to Chick-fil-A each and every month. And Chick-fil-A requires their franchise operators to pay 50% of gross profit. That is in addition to the 15% I mentioned earlier, as well as the rent that I mentioned a moment ago. So once again, let's use the example of $100,000. If you were a Chick-fil-A operator and your franchise made $100,000 in one single week, you would have to pay out $15,000 to Chick-fil-A in the form of a royalty. You would have to pay $50,000 in the form of like a secondary royalty, which means that when all things are said and done, if your Chick-fil-A made $100,000, $65,000 of that would be going back to Chick-fil-A. So this may sound like a lot, and don't get me wrong, it is a lot of money. Paying over 65% of all of your gross profit back to the franchisor is something that is simply not the industry standard. But then again, Chick-fil-A doesn't operate like a normal franchise. And whenever it comes to the Chick-fil-A franchise system, whenever you're paying that $10,000 entry fee that people love to talk about, you actually aren't paying it in order to own a business. Instead, you're paying it to get your foot into the door of a high-paying career. Now, despite everything I've said in this video, and despite the fact that Chick-fil-A definitely strays from the norm as far as franchises go, the reality is a lot of people want to become Chick-fil-A operators. There's a huge wait list, the acceptance rate is incredibly low, and Chick-fil-A is known that once you become an operator, you very rarely leave. And if you decide to leave, it's almost impossible to get back into the franchise system. It's basically a one-shot deal. If you get your shot and you screw it up, then you simply will never be allowed back in again. Now, at the end of the day, to answer the question that I made at the beginning of this video, is it possible to own a Chick-fil-A franchise for $10,000? The answer is no. Whenever it comes to Chick-fil-A, it's impossible to actually own the franchise. And by paying $10,000, you aren't paying to own it. You're paying to work at a franchise and have some skin in the game. And with that, you're able to make a really good income, you're able to have a really great career, and there's a lot of opportunity that comes along with that. But to say that you can own a Chick-fil-A franchise for just $10,000, it is simply untrue and inaccurate. But with that being said, you guys, I wanted to make this video because I've always found the Chick-fil-A franchise system to be extremely fascinating.
Dang, that low-key sucks. I don't know. I would not want to own a Chick-fil-A if it's as black and white as she says it is. That kind of sounds like all the hard work, just little benefits. I don't know. How y'all feel about that? I would want to know, like, would you own a Chick-fil-A even though it's not only $10K and you're not really owning it? Like, what is your thoughts on that? Leave it in the comments below, and I will see you on the next video. Peace.